Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Ask Us Anything Analytics. Today, I have with me David Yaffe. He is the co founder and CEO of Estuary, a company that focuses on real time data. David, how's it going today?
Great. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For those people in the audience who haven't met you, haven't come across you on LinkedIn yet, can you give a little bit of background on what you've been up to?
Sure. Yeah. So I build a company called Estuary. We're a real-time data company. It's kind of a little bit misleading because we work with both real-time and batch data. Our goal is to make it really easy to unify data, to like extract data from wherever it is and use it however you want, um, and not have to think about the world in terms of like my engineers use real-time data and my analysts use batch data, and um, how do we connect to the system? It's just connect to the system, get the data, process it as quickly as you can, and have real-time insights if possible. So I came into the space through previous work in the martech space. So I built a company called Arbor, um, and that was a data platform. Our idea was that in the martech space, it really matters to get in front of people quickly. So if someone expresses interest in a product, if you want any chance of influencing their purchase intent, then you have to probably get in front of them with an ad very, very quickly. So our goal was to make everything that we did real time. The scale's really high there. You have to work with historical data, makes it a hard problem. And we built technology to solve that problem, which led us where we are today.
Very cool. Very cool. So I'm going to kick off a few questions about analytics and what analytics looks like at Estuary. And I'll encourage everyone to leave a comment. Let us know where you're tuning in from. That way we know the comments are working. David, just so you know, you could see the comments in the top right corner of the screen, so you can pre-read them. And also, everyone out there, just get your questions in the chat about, any analytics questions that you have that David and I can cover. So let me just switch the, sorry, I lost my, there it is. Get your questions in the chat. Okay. So first question that I want to know is, what does your analytics stack look like at Estuary? So obviously you're using the Estuary product to load data into Snowflake, but or I don't know if it's Snowflake. You're loading data somewhere using Estuary, but what does the rest of that analytics stack look like that brings you insights?
It'd be really funny if I was like, no, we use Fivetran.
That would be
No, we
funny.
do. We use Estuary. Obviously, that's the means. The sources that we work with are mostly Martech related things. Um, so we actually use Supabase for our production backend. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Supabase
No.
is a Postgres database effectively that is able to serve API calls. So you can put a dashboard on top of it, and that's what powers our dashboard. So it's a really nice natural thing to be able to extract data from it using CDC. So we do that. We get CDC into BigQuery as our destination, um, and we're a GCP stack. That's the reason for that. Um,
Okay.
and then we work with HubSpot, Mailchimp, Zendesk, um, and a few other things. We're using Retool on top of it.
As the
I
BI platform, right?
Yeah, as the BI platform, and probably thinking about switching to something like Hashboard or Omni soon.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I know Carlos from Hashboard. He's a great guy, really fun to talk to. Actually, Carlos, if you're out there, I'd love to have you on this show someday, and we can talk more about Hashboard.
Carlos is
So
a good guy.
what? So tell me about Retool. I haven't used it. What's your experience? Do you like it? I know you're thinking about switching, but what is going into that thought about switching over from Retool to another tool?
I think Retool is great. It's really useful um, for a team that's a little bit more technical. I'm not saying like super technical or anything like that. Um, but what we're looking at is bringing on a whole bunch of more businessy stakeholders and we don't have the bandwidth to pre-compute a bunch of different views for those business stakeholders. Retail is good, but something like Lean makes it a little bit easier to define an overall model and then do a lot of drill downs into. that overall model.
Cool. Cool. All right. So just to finish up the question about your analytics stack, so you mentioned a few source systems, some marketing systems. Looks like BigQuery is your destination. You got Retool for your BI. Anything else in there that makes up your analytics stack?
Yeah, we use a little bit of DBT too.
A little bit of DBT. Nice.
Yeah.
That actually just brings up a spontaneous question. So your product, Estuary Flow, can do on-the-fly transformations using SQL, but it's does not use DBT. So I was wondering if you thought about in the future incorporating DBT right into the products to run kind of real-time DBT.
Yeah, definitely. So, um, our transformation product is intended to be a little bit different than an analytics use case would be. It's meant for building out data products. So you build transformation once, that runs forever, and then you have this real-time data product that's powering, an up to the millisecond dashboard. Um, so it could be used for a dashboard, but no one really needs an up to the millisecond dashboard as much as you need that for powering an actual reporting product within a system. We actually use it for our own reporting within our system. So it builds all of the views, and all of our views and the product are always up to date. The reason that we don't support DBT, just to get to your question,
Yeah.
is that joins are a little bit more complex still. We're working on making them look exactly like standard SQL is such a funny term. Standard SQL joins, but yeah, they're a little bit more complex for it. And so once we do, then we'll hope to integrate that with DBT too.
Yeah, that would be very cool. It looks like we got a question in the chat here from Ganesh. He's asking, is cloud agnostic even practical these days for analytics? If yes, which type of organization should focus on that direction? So let me see if I understand what you're saying, Ganesh, and you can update the chat if I got this right. So you're asking like cloud agnostic, meaning like, do you have to pick one? Do you have to pick AWS, Google Cloud, Azure? Is that what you're asking here? And I think the answer is yeah. I think you have to just pick one. I mean, I've worked at some multi-cloud companies before, so a lot of people, even if they prefer AWS, I said people, I meant companies, even if they prefer AWS, they have Azure kind of anyway because they have Azure Active Directory, they have Microsoft Outlook and Office 365 and those whole suite of tools. So then they end up with some landscape with cloud storage. I think Azure calls it blob storage. But then they have a lot of stuff going on AWS. It's messy to not just pick one cloud and just go with it. David, what are your thoughts on the interpretation of the question that I took, and also just answering the question as well?
I think for analytics specifically, it's hard, right? Because analytics, you're gonna want to have your data in a single place so that you can read it and use it and turn it into value. But multi-cloud is definitely possible, and it can be useful for things like disaster recovery, or even just internal uses where you're um, co-locating with your in customers if that's a thing for your business. Um, but I think it's less valuable on the analytics side, in my opinion, versus those types of things where they're truly like business mandated use cases that enable it.
Another thought I had here is I haven't experienced this firsthand, but I've talked to some friends who work over at Johnson and Johnson, and so J&J, they have every tool under the sun, and they have so many departments, and they're such a huge company with like consumer brands, and then pharmaceutical, and they really just have so many different types of products that the company's just an absolute behemoth. But someone that I talked to over there that works in BI mentioned that they're actually migrating from cloud back to on-prem due to cost and control, which I think I'm wondering if that's going to be a trend that companies start migrating out of the cloud. The cloud just makes it so easy that most of the time it's worth the extra cost. But I don't know. Any thoughts on that, David?
Um, yeah, I think you have to be a really big company to be thinking like that, right? Like when your cloud costs, when it's cheaper to like roll your own data center, that means you've really made it. Um, I don't think it's really practical for most businesses, but I have heard it a couple times.
Yeah.
Um, you need so much. I remember like I worked at a company, my first job out of college, um, and we had a $6 million data center, right? Um, which now I think about that, and I guess people give that type of money to AWS or GCP or whatever, but the use case wasn't that big, and it just was so expensive to actually roll that. I wouldn't recommend it for the faint of heart.
Totally. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of cloud. And I guess my last thought on that question about being cloud agnostic is as a consultant, yes, you have to be technology agnostic. So I'm a consultant, I have to be cloud agnostic as in I have to be able to walk into a company that's using Azure or GCP or AWS and serve them all the same. Even though I love AWS, I love Snowflake, I love DBT, if the company is already using, let's say, Redshift, it would be a bad idea to go and say you should tear down your Redshift and go with Snowflake unless they were already thinking about doing that anyway. So technology agnostic is an absolute important attribute of a consultant that you can have your favorite tech stack, but if the customer already has something, you should support them on what they already have.
Absolutely.
Cool.
When you sell picks and shovels, you have to meet people where they are.
Exactly. Exactly. Ganesh, thanks so much for the question. Um, so my next question regarding analytics at Estuary. So, what key performance indicators are you looking at? What are like when you wake up in the morning? Do you have like, hey, I want to see how yesterday was doing, or are you more of like a weekly, a monthly guy? So, I guess there's a bunch of questions in there. So, what are the KPIs, and what are the cadence that you're looking at these KPIs?
Yeah, so we have two sales motions at Estuary. The first is PLG, and PLG is really data driven, right? Like you need to ensure that all of your data coming in from your source systems are mapped in as quickly as you can. I told you that we use this product called Supabase, which that's helpful for us because it manages our logins, it manages everything. We're able to replicate that data in real time to our marketing systems using our own system, and that's helpful because it lets us basically correlate like all of the live traffic that we have on our dashboard with the rest of everything. So um, that's one of the biggest things, and when we do that, we're measuring from the top of funnel. It's things like for like GA, like who's coming to our site. So I missed something at least there. Who's coming to our site, and then a little lower down, it's things like HubSpot and Supabase, which is our actual logins, and then Zendesk and Mailchimp. I mentioned Zendesk before too. So like, who's actually starting to take action on our site, talk to us, submit requests, do things like that, um, and then I guess the actual signups would then come from a production database, and knowing that that person converted to a paid user, that could be Stripe. So I keep on missing apps that we actually use. Um,
So, from a KPI perspective, are you looking at like number of active users, like compared to last month, or you guys are
yeah,
relatively new? You might be doing year over year stuff, but maybe month over month is more relevant. Is there timeframes that you prefer?
we do week over week, month over month. We do, um, really, we're not doing year over year at this point. That's a little bit
It
like
doesn't
the
tell
growth
you anything.
metrics don't make any sense.
Yeah,
It's like,
ten
oh,
thousand
five
percent.
thousand percent
Yeah,
um, but it's so the top of the funnel is the amount of even people coming to our site. So the amount of sessions that we're having, the way that they're navigating around the site. Then so that's really, really important to us. The number of people who then go and convert either by reaching out to us and scheduling time, or convert by just logging into the app. But we have a full free tier, free trial. You can go use it. So we get, now we've been working on increasing the conversion rates. So we have about, on a weekly basis, we're at about 200 people that come into the app and actually use it. So that's about like 1% conversion rate or something. We could really get that to like 5%. We really should. So
Okay.
that's
Wow.
what we're working on now.
So you have a KPI or at least a dashboard or some type of data that's telling you like what percent are converting from free trial to actual paid customers.
Even just from like coming to our site, to conversion to free trial, and then conversion from free trial to paid customer. So that's like there's a whole funnel of drop off there, and that's really where like the meat and potatoes are.
Totally. So Dan was asking, should we throw some questions in here? And the answer is yes. So on LinkedIn, it's a little confusing because there's really no chat per se. It's just comments on the live stream. So you can leave a comment there as a question. And then on YouTube, it's like a classic kind of chat. So if you're on YouTube, um, you have that chat option. So thank you, Dan. Looking forward to a question from you. So let's keep going here with some of the questions that I prepared. So what there's a question here about how do you manage based on KPI results? So maybe you could take one example that you were just discussing about conversion rate. So like how do you go from 1 to 5% or how are you using data to drive the action?
Yeah. Um, so I think like a good example is we write some SEO content, right? Like that's one of the ways that you can get people to a website to start the very very top of the funnel. Um, and it's really interesting to see what gets traffic, what gets volume, like what gets clicks and searches and the US. I think that those types of data points are really interesting for me just to know what there's demand for, right? Like these are unsolved problems that people have. And so, that's something that I think we look at and spend a little bit of time on. Even it can even affect product direction to know like what people are searching for, what they want to do. Or maybe it can lead to lots of different things. Maybe you'll build something, maybe you'll just have more customer conversations to figure out what like that signal means. Um, like why are you searching for this? Does it actually make sense? And sometimes it can be a false signal and sometimes it's real.
Nice. Perfect. So Dan did give us another question here. So curious what sort of use cases you've seen around DuckDB. I love the idea and seems so many existing approaches can be rethought. So I'll let you take this one, David. I don't have much experience with DuckDB, and I'm sure some of your customers have used it.
Yeah, we actually have a destination that we support to Mother Duck. So that's the managed version of DuckDB. Um, and we've just started seeing some traction on that one. It seems like people are starting to make that SaaS version of DuckDB. Um, they're really trying to use it as their actual database. So if you don't have massive data, um, and you're just doing analysis on like SaaS apps and stuff, we have seen CDC as well into DuckDB. So I think it's a pretty useful paradigm to just use for those things, um, if you don't have massive data.
Yeah. Um, I only used it for the first time recently. I'm trying to think what the context was. I was installing some new tool and just kind of prototyping, and the steps were like, pip install duckdb, and I was like, oh wow, that's really cool. We could spin up a database just with pip install. I thought that was like kind of an amazing concept. I've set up manual Postgres databases before, obviously MySQL and Microsoft SQL Server, but certainly DuckDB was the easiest one to turn on. So
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
was impressed there, but I don't really have much experience with using it data in and out and actually like production use cases. But they certainly are gaining popularity. I'm hearing a lot of chatter, and it'll be interesting to see how much that catches on.
Yeah,
Uh,
agreed. I think it will. And if I had a little crystal ball, I would think that it's just gonna, get more popular now.
yeah. Any idea how their managed offering is priced or
Um, it's pretty reasonable. It's pretty cost effective. I don't know the specific way it's
yeah.
priced, but you know.
Okay. Yeah, I will look that up after. I am very curious actually. Okay, so we do have another question here. Let's see. While designing data architecture, how and when one should choose between open source and paid tools?
This
As
is
we
an
can see there,
interesting one.
yeah. Yeah. So why don't you go first on this one again? And I have a lot of thoughts here as well.
Me too. So I think like it's really easy to jump to open source because it seems appealing. It is appealing. It can be free, right? Like free is the cheapest on the surface, at least. I think like one of the hard parts about open source are that like the long term cost of ownership can actually be expensive. One person sets it up, and then that person goes away, and no one else knows how it works, and all of a sudden you have a system in place that that's really hard to manage and maintain and evolve over time. So that's one of the risks of open source. So, but if you have the right type of team in place and they have the requisite knowledge and skill sets, it can be a really attractive solution. I think the data space is a bit of a strange place to have open source um, because it's like the type of thing that really involves that knowledge. Unlike using a big open source library in software engineering, which it's probably really maintained and very up to date, and it's always going to work. It doesn't necessarily work like that when you're talking about like open source from a connector point of view. We've seen that they don't always work. They have problems, so the ongoing maintenance is really hard, and the community isn't necessarily there to maintain it. Um, I would for that reason, I think it's something that you should really consider before just jumping headfirst into it. But
Yeah.
curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. So, before jumping into open source specifically, when we think about make versus buy, I'm always a fan of use an existing tool, whether that's buy or use open source. So, I wouldn't suggest to roll your own in any type in data pipelines, which actually means you're using less Python. So we spent all this time learning how to use Python and how to get really great at Python, and now I'm kind of shifting towards, hey, don't do so much custom Python, use a tool. And that tool might be open source or it might be a paid platform. So then kind of shifting to that open source debate, I'm going to give a very similar answer to what David said. It really depends on the competency of the team. So I'm consulting somewhere now where this company has an extremely impressive AWS infrastructure team. They have an extremely impressive data engineering team, and I'm helping with some of the analytics engineering stuff. So in their case, we chose dbt Core, the open source, and they're using managed Airflow and a bunch of other open source tools. So they prefer open source, and for them, it's really not a big risk because they have just such wonderful competency on the infrastructure side. Um, I will say that is this client that I'm mentioning here is the first client I've ever worked at that had such detailed competency. So 99% of my clients leading up to this point, we've put them into managed tools, cloud hosted tools. So whether that's DBT Cloud, usually DBT Cloud for running the jobs at least, even if you're developing on open source. So there's ways to kind of keep the cost down. Not everyone needs a license. Um, um, Airflow. I'm sorry. I meant to say Airbyte that time. Kind of going cloud versus self-hosting, because if you've tried self-hosting Airbyte, it could be pretty hard in production. Once your load goes up, there's a lot of things to think about, and upgrades can go very poorly. I've had the thing not be able to turn on after an upgrade. So just going with a cloud-based product um, is usually my recommendation. And of course, Estuary is out there as well. I don't think you guys actually, do you have an open source version of it?
We do. It's not something that we pedal really hard, and it's the reason is because we are distributed streaming system under the hood. So running it isn't like running a single Docker container or something.
Yeah, so I did think I saw on your website that you could kind of self-host Estuary, but it's not really, it's not really recommended because I'm sure there's a lot of complexities around self-hosting. So yeah,
Yep.
Ganesh, thanks again for the question. So yeah, my take is it really depends on the team that's supporting it, and if you have a really highly competent team, then you can go open source, but most customers, it is worth the cost to pay for what the company is charging. Now, obviously, you don't wanna go with the most expensive products in the industry. Find a product that, has a good price point. Um, cool. So Dan, he was the one that asked about DuckDB. So I've seen a decent amount of BI tools have been embedding in the browser, so users can do a lot of interactive behavior within the browser, having to go to a server. Yeah, so I mean, I'm a Tableau guy. So Tableau is like a desktop first development environment, but they also have you can edit stuff on the web, and certainly sharing is 100% via the browser. So that's either Tableau Server or Tableau Online, or it's called Tableau Cloud now, which is the managed version. Um, that's that's been most of my experience. Power BI, same thing. It is a desktop first kind of software with then publishing up to the cloud. But now we're seeing new tools where the entire development experience is in the browser. So Hashboard was one that we discussed earlier today. Um, Entire end to end. There's no desktop software to download, and I really like that. I think a lot of tools need to kind of up their game to that browser first experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so interestingly, like that's a really good example of Hashboard of something that kind of it solves a similar problem with a different way of solving it. What it's actually doing on the back end is it's connecting to your Snowflake or whatever your data warehouse is, but presenting a primitive that looks like a browser for it. Whereas, you know, something along the lines of DuckDB are just doing it like locally, and you're able to run these big, deep, complex queries, you know, without having to even transit over the wire, push information anywhere but your local browser. And that's super interesting. I think like there's so many tools that can be re-architected now with these types of primitives. So I think
Absolutely.
you know, like we are 100% thinking about using DuckDB as like the reporting, the thing that handles reporting for us in that way too.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if you even need BigQuery because your data is probably not huge, right?
Yeah, so it probably don't need BigQuery. Not yet, not at this point. But it's a simple tool. It's cheap.
Yep.
BigQuery is not that expensive. There's not too many
Yeah.
reasons not to do it.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what I tell people the same about Snowflake when I've gotten in multiple discussions where people say, "Oh, Snowflake is overkill for this use case." And I'm like, "Well, why would I use like Postgres? Like I can't see why that would be
yeah,
simpler or more cost effective than using an extra small Snowflake warehouse for $3 an hour." It's like it's really not overkill for any use case. So,
right. You're turning it off. You're only querying it when you're querying it, and as long as you're following reasonable practices, it's cheap.
yep.
Um, so I completely agree. There's no reason, and it's like why wouldn't you future proof something if you could?
Yeah, totally. Totally. Um, yeah, along the lines of BI in the browser, I really wish that Tableau would make a complete parody of their desktop product. Now, over the years, they've gotten better and better with you could do almost everything in the browser that you can do on desktop, but some of the features are missing from the right click menu. There's certain things that you can't do, and I won't go into specifics, but every time I end up trying to make a quick change in the browser, doing some development in the browser, I always end up opening up in the desktop software almost like 99% of the time. So, yeah, I wish they would just um, make it exactly the same, but
Yep.
I guess that's hard to do. Otherwise, they would have done it already.
Yeah,
Um,
it's probably not something that they're spending their innovation credits on. Not the thing that's going to make them the most money. Some
exactly.
enterprises telling them that they want some button moved over here for, and they're going to do
Right.
that.
Right. Exactly. Or work on AI and stuff like that, which they've really
Yeah.
been pushing recently. I think Ask Tableau is like the new thing. Um, So
Have you
tell
tried
us
it?
more about your background. So you're a software developer. How did you come into this space? How did you learn? And then did you first get started as an analyst and then learn development, or were you a developer first?
I'm not a developer. I never was. I
Oh,
was an
okay.
engineer. So once upon a time, I was a mechanical engineer, and that was a long time ago. I worked at Boeing, and I ended up getting in this space in a circuitous route, which was through the Martech space. And really, the problems in the Martech space are similar. Um, they're like the bleeding edge at some level because the data is so large that you're working with, that you have to solve it in different problems. So I remember we were doing we one of the companies that I built was a company called Invite Media, and it was a demand side platform. Really, what it does is it listens to calls from a whole bunch of websites, and then it learns how it's going to respond to them. Um, if it wanted to buy that, like inventory on the website, and inventory is an ad, right? If it wanted to place an ad on the website, so we at when I left, we were doing like 16 million requests per second, that we had to listen to and manage and say if
Wow.
we wanted to buy that in real time. So meaning that you had to reply in, less than 50 milliseconds with a response, whether you wanted to get that or not. And so that's a hard problem. And that's the fact that we were working on those types of problems. The analytics is really hard. We didn't have things like Snowflake to work on, and make something like that work. So we had to like build views and do stuff like that that would make the data a lot smaller. Um, so yeah, that's really how I got into it. We built some technology called Gazette for one of my last businesses. That was a streaming system that can work with historical data too. So really not quite as focused on the analytics side of things.
Hmm.
Um, More people who consume that would be more software engineers. And then um, we saw that problem and we said, hey, why can't this type of system be just as simple as any other analytics system out there? Why couldn't you use it to actually create true real time analytics? And that's the weird route that we got in.
So that's how Estuary was born, was kind of based on that thought where you were having these very high clicks per second on one platform and then kind of saying, hey, can we abstract this and use it as like a real-time data ingestion platform? Is that right?
Yeah, basically, yeah, yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Looks like we got another question here. Ganesh, you're the best. Thanks for sending so many questions. I absolutely love that. In modern data analytics, do people really follow the data modeling like dimensional modeling for analytics? As you know, maintaining and developing these models need a lot of efforts. I'll take my first stab at this because this is really what I do for my clients. Um, so I personally take a hybrid approach. So dimensional modeling, yes. So keeping facts and dimensions separate, and modeling your facts one way and modeling your dimensions another way. And then at the end, right before I send it to Tableau, I join it as one big table. So that's another modeling term that's different than dimensional modeling. But when you, in my experience, now I'm not an expert here, but I think about one big table as being dimensional modeling right up into the last second. um, and there are certain aspects of Kimball's approach which I don't necessarily rigorously stick to because it adds complexity. So the concept of every table is getting surrogate keys. So my let's say I have sales, and those sales have um, products, and the sales have customers, right? So I have a star schema with three tables. I got sales, products, customers. And in Kimball modeling, it would say that you need your surrogate key for your product and your customer on your sales fact table. I don't always go through all of the effort of creating the surrogate keys and installing them on the fact table because it's extra work when I could just left join everything and then I'm safe. So I could just use the natural keys, if you will. So there's certain things that I leave out that Kimball says that you should do, but I leave them out because I want to get things done fast. But if the customer says, hey, we want a proper star schema, of course, we go through the effort of doing that. But normally I'm just trying to deliver an analytics use case and not take months to do it. I don't want to take 8 weeks to do something when I can show them some value in 2 weeks. So I I will cut some corners that way, but absolutely, we are using the classical concepts of dimensional modeling. Um,
Yeah, I think that makes sense. One of the biggest potential issues with ELT is that the data can change out from under you. So, that makes it so that a lot of people cut corners, right? Because how can you keep those corners if you don't have a data contract, to use that term, um,
exactly.
where your data is actually going to be in a structure. So I think as long as your organization is set up in a way that you can ensure that the source data is going to be consistent and reliable, and you're not going to just have to consistently go in and change your queries as the underlying data changes. You can do stuff like that, and it's a good idea.
Yeah. So one of the kind of fundamental principles of a star schema is that you can always interjoin and you'll never drop records from your facts, because those unknown dimensions or missing dimensions, you have you have a record in the dimension table for the unknown dimensions. So it allows the analyst or analytics engineer to always use an inner join, which back in the day, on traditional databases, inner joining was way faster than left outer join. Now it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Maybe it makes some difference on some platforms, but on Snowflake, I don't notice a big difference on left outer join versus inner join. So now instead of using this surrogate key approach, I just left outer join everything instead of inner join, and you save like 2 weeks of data modeling on most projects. So,
Is it
and then
more
there's,
expensive though? Is the question.
is it more expensive? Yeah, I don't know. Um, Follow-up question, do we have any modern data modeling concepts? If yes, which are those? Okay, so one big table I mentioned, and then I'm gonna pull this out here. I have this massive book. Look how thick this is on Data Vault. So it's like a little commercial here, building scalable data warehouse with Data Vault 2.0. So Data Vault is a really kind of interesting next step. So once you understand dimensional modeling and Kimball's approach, getting into Data Vault and really understanding how that works. So it's basically an insert only. You never update, and everything is circulating around the business concepts, business keys. Um, I would say that would be a good next step after Kimball.
Yep.
Um, let's see. Dan threw in another question. Thanks, Dan. This is awesome. Thanks for supporting us with questions. Oh, he says not a question. That's something I discovered yesterday, was that Snowflake now supports an ASOF. I don't know what that is, but here, let's just check real quick.
Yeah, I was just looking. Oh,
I think I'll have to come back to this, but yeah, Dan, thanks for giving me something to research after the stream. That's awesome. I need to stay up to date with all the latest stuff in Snowflake, and man, it's
I
sometimes
think
it's
it.
very challenging um, to be a consultant where every product that you work with is just constantly evolving, constantly improving, constantly getting better, and to stay up to date on even just my very small stack, which, as I said, I prefer DBT, Snowflake, Tableau, and then however we load the data is different for every client depending on what they already have usually. But even with just those four tools, it's like, man, hard to stay up to date sometimes.
Yeah. Um, Looks like it's a fuzzy timestamp based join, but that was just a really quick look.
Oh, cool.
Really neat though.
Cool. Um, so at Estuary, to what extent are you using spreadsheets for inputs, for outputs, or if you are you sending data to your CFO in a spreadsheet, or like tell me about how spreadsheets are received at Estuary.
Yeah, I think it's like inevitable, right? Spreadsheets are the way that your finance team is going to do everything. The way that all your financial metrics are really going to be presented to people at the end of the day. So we use them a good amount for that type of thing. We even use them for like planning sometimes if we're being really lazy and we don't want to create tickets and stuff. Um, so we have like a small engineering team that like one of them just uses a spreadsheet to do product roadmaps and stuff. So everything from product roadmaps um, to financial planning to like models and all that stuff. We probably use like the majority of our days and not our day, but the majority of like that type of activity is going to be in spreadsheets.
Nice. Any like inputs into the database, like using Estuary to load from Google Sheets or anything like that, or not so much?
We don't usually input to the database via spreadsheet just because it feels really dangerous. Although technically we support doing that,
Yeah,
um, but yeah, it just doesn't feel like the right move. But yeah, I think it's something that could be useful. Um, we did toy with one interesting use case, which was using a spreadsheet to um, augment a chat GPT model. Um, so being able to, our system can load data into like Pinecone and vectorize it for you. And then you can use a spreadsheet to input data for that process, which is pretty interesting.
oh, nice. Very cool. So Dan has another question. How do you stay up to date with all these changes, especially if some of these features are hidden behind enterprise plans that require large scale? So great question. So I take two approaches. One kind of very passive approach to learning, which is while I do dishes at night after my son is to bed, I watch YouTube. I stick in the earbuds and I'll throw on Seattle Data Guy or I'll throw on Zach Wilson, and I'll just kind of passively learn something while I'm doing dishes. And then as far as my active learning, I like to take one big technology per year and really go deep on it. So this year I'm learning Airflow. I've been a data engineer for a long time, but I've never orchestrated with Airflow, and I have the need to now with one of my clients. Um, a lot of my clients for the past 5 years have been through Alteryx. So you can actually use Alteryx as an orchestrator if you use the crew macros. So you can chain jobs together and say, if this job succeeds, then run this next one, and if it fails, then do something else. So I've done a lot of I haven't seen many people use Alteryx as an orchestrator, but I've done a lot of that using Alteryx for an orchestrator. So this year I'm learning Airflow and one technology per year. I took 1 year, I was like, DBT, it's going to be the next big thing. Let me go really deep on DBT. And after like 2-3 months in DBT, if you're in it every single day, you're like, you're feeling really good about your skills in DBT. And then 1 year, I just cracked out on Snowflake, and that's been really great for me. It's supported me for the last 4 years. 1 year I really went deep on SAP HANA. So it's like every year I just have one deep dive and then really shallow dives on almost a daily basis. Just while while I'm doing dishes, I'm taking in some information. And
Yeah.
then that, and you see LinkedIn posts, just like passive reading. But yeah, it is hard to stay completely up to date on all the techs. The last thing I'll say before I let David jump in here on this question is for Tableau, I read the release notes. So when they update a new version, I make sure I stay in touch with those release notes. And if it's something completely new, I try and go figure it out. And if it's something cosmetic, then I just kind of skim over it. Or a lot of times I'll catalog something in my brain like, oh, there's a big new feature. I need to come back to it later and learn it. And then maybe a year or two goes by and I still like, oh, I haven't really gotten into parameter actions yet. I need to really dive deep there and then kind of circle back to it. So,
Yep. So
Dave,
release
how about
notes is
you?
what I was going to say. Yeah. I think that's a pretty important one. Just like if there's a technology that you really care about, that's how you're going to learn what they're doing. Um, but it's hard to read them. They're pretty dry in general and stuff. So it
Yeah.
might not be the most fun thing to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, audiobooks for like more fun stuff. I like to read a lot. And I can't just like sit there all the time and read. So audiobooks can be really good for that. I'm I think I learn a lot from like conversations with customers and conversations with just like people. So half my day is probably spent talking to people, and um, if a lot of the times you'll end up learning like, all the different ways to do something, which can be pretty enlightening.
Nice. Do you do a lot of conferences?
I don't do we show up at them usually, but I've never been a big conference person. Just because it's like, I don't know, they're a little bit busy and, I think at some level they make sense to show up and, to have a little booth and stuff like that. But what about you? Do you do conferences?
So I've done the Tableau conference once in 2018, I think, and I've done the DBT conference Coalesce once. To this past one, I've done it, and I'm going to do it again. But
Hmm.
I'm not a huge conference guy because I'm paying my own way to get there. It's expensive. I'm not setting up a booth when I get there because I'm just a one man consulting company. So
Yeah,
um, it's time off of work, so you lose an entire week of revenue as an independent consultant, and of course it's expensive to get in with the hotel and the flights and everything else. So I'm going to continue to do Coalesce once, the once a year DBT conference. I did get a lot of value out of it. I really enjoyed talking with people. I enjoyed meeting people, networking. um but I'm not a huge go to all the conferences guy. So
yeah, and I think that's for me the biggest value that I find is a bunch of people are in the same place that so I always will just set up meetings at the conference, and that's really it. Like, just because that way you remove all the costs of traveling, especially in like today's remote world. It's nice to have those meetings, but that's for me, that's the value.
nice. Yeah, so do you, like, find people on LinkedIn ahead of time who are going to the conference and then try and schedule with them there, or what's your
Yeah, I'll usually post, and then people will maybe reply, and so I'll offer time that way. But then customers usually.
nice. Yeah, I did have a few, sales reps, I guess, from different products reach out to me and ask me if I was attending Coalesce because that especially in October, I was posting a lot about DBT, and I had, like,
Mhm.
3 or 4, BI companies reach out to me and be like, "Hey, do you wanna meet up at Coalesce?" And it's like, "Sure, I'll give you a half an hour." I'm really not working anyway, so
Yeah,
I could totally see that being totally productive for someone who's owning a product kind of approach
yeah,
like
you
that.
can get some free swag too.
Yeah. Did you have any questions for me?
How long have you been, working as a consultant? What's your biggest learning in the time period that you've been working as one?
Okay. Yeah, so I've been consulting for 5 years now, a little bit over 5 years. So I think it was September of 2018 is when I jumped in. Um, and my biggest learning, so I'll take the easy answer first while I continue to chew on the more the harder answer. But the easy answer is on the technology space. Learning Snowflake and DBT has been extremely fun. It's been really cool to see how simple solutions can be when you have technologies that you kind of just work right out of the box. Um,
Mhm.
my biggest learning for dealing with clients and gaining new clients is not to be so passive. So I've been very passive in my marketing for 5 years as I've been
Mhm.
contracting with other consulting firms who kind of just put me to work. So I've had a lot of really great relationships with especially with Clear Intelligence, a consulting firm out of Boston, who's just handed me a tremendous amount of work over the last 5 years. So I didn't really have to think about where my customers are coming from, where my sales are coming from. But I wish I hadn't been so passive with marketing and um, trying to gain more direct clients over the years. So I think that was my
Mhm.
biggest learning is that even if you're busy, you should still be doing some marketing anyway. And
Yeah.
um, when you become a consultant, you're really in sales. I don't really do a lot of direct sales. I do more of like posting on LinkedIn and hope that people reach out to me. And even with my medium small LinkedIn following, I could see that it's growing and that sales will come in that way. So I've had a few
Mhm.
people reach out to me, but I can see that as I grow more of a following, it is going to be a way that customers find me. So
I've appreciated your content. I think it's very focused, like you're telling a story, and it's really like there's a brand there. So I've appreciated that.
oh, thank you so much. That's awesome to hear. That's awesome to hear. Um, so I think I've went through all the questions I had prepared for you, David. If there's no more questions in the chat, we'll wrap up a few minutes early. Um,
Cool.
yeah,
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
absolutely. This has been really fun. Thanks everyone for joining, and especially thanks to Dan and Ganesh for firing off all those questions for us. This has been really great, and talk to you soon.
Take care.